Okay, so we are continuing with the next entry in Harker's journal, which is going to be the following day. And this this entry is going to document Harker's first real bizarre encounter with the Count. Uh, Early on in the journal entry, he writes, "It may be that this strange night existence is telling on me, but would that there were all. But would that were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he, I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place." Um, so Harker is definitely becoming very aware of his foreboding atmosphere, this environment that he cannot escape, this night existence. This is some more of this light and dark imagery that Stoker is going to use throughout the course of the novel. And it makes sense. I mean, you talk to anybody who has lived in the darkness, literally in the dark, for numerous days, and you start to get stir crazy. This is a well documented aspect of the northern part of North America. This is true of anyone in remote parts of a country where you lose power and you're waiting for the power to be restored. You're in your home, you're going through long periods of dark, especially if it's during the wintertime. It starts to get on you. You start to have a change of behavior. This is why human creatures were not made to live in the dark. And when he writes, "I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place," he doesn't know it now, but quite literally, this is true. He is the only living soul. You could look at this physically, because of course the Count is a form of the undead. We're not talking a zombie here. That's a different kind of creature. This is a living dead, or not? No, well, that's a zombie. So this is the living undead. And spiritually speaking, Harker is the only one with a living soul. The Count's soul is damned because of the nature of what he is. This again will come out more as the story progresses. So I'm going to skip ahead here to the next part of the journal entry where Harker encounters Dracula, and begins to see him for who he really is, literally, or in a sense, won't see him for who he really is. So Harker writes, "I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window and was just beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard the Count's voice saying to me, 'Good morning.' I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting I had cut myself slightly, but did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it, except myself. This was startling, and, coming on the top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase that vague feeling of uneasiness which I always have when the Count is near. But at the instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did so half round to look for some sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. So here we have Harker's first clue that Dracula is very much something otherworldly. The Count doesn't throw a reflection into a mirror because, in fact, he doesn't exist. He exists as undead. He is alive only in the sense of a mockery of creation. And the mirror always tells the truth. We kind of see this as a running theme in fairy tales. You think of Snow White. The mirror cannot lie. When the wicked queen, asks who is the fairest in all the land, and the mirror responds that it is her. And then Snow White comes into the story, and now the mirror must say to the queen that she is not the fairer. So this idea of mirrors reflecting truth is I'm sure there's other stories. I can't think of one at the moment. I'm trying to think of another example, but the point is, this mirror is going to be an important part of the story, in the sense of a mirror can only reflect that which is real. A mirror cannot reflect something that doesn't exist. So I'm sure that there's something even deeper here, but I can't really grasp it at the moment. I think it is important to point out that Harker, again, describes being in the presence of the Count as being an uneasiness that seems to follow the Count wherever he goes. And again, this is how evil works. When we come into the presence of evil, it is almost as if God has hardwired us for detecting it. Our spidey sense goes off. There's something off when we are around evil. And so it's good that Harker has this sense, and that it is alive, and the more he's in this castle, the more it becomes awakened. Of course, Stoker's use of the word demoniac fury is apropos, because the Count is very much of hell. He is very much a representative of Satan. He's a servant of Satan in the sense of being contrary to the created order and at war, rebelling against the created order. His very existence is a rebellion, being someone that should be dead but yet is not. I very much like the part where the Count is forced to draw away because his hand comes into contact with the crucifix that he's wearing. So, as a Christian, this is a very strong scene, because it shows that Harker isn't saved by something he has done. He is saved at the mercy of Christ. If that crucifix is not around his neck, it kind of begs the question of, what would have happened to Harker. But the crucifix is there, and acts as his salvation, literally, of his life in this moment. So as the entry moves on, Harker starts to pick up on clues. He starts to ponder on certain peculiarities about the Count. He notes that it is strange that he has not seen the Count eat or drink. He notes how the castle itself is situated. as he says, on the very edge of a terrible precipice, a stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. This is a veritable prison. Harker writes in his journal, doors, doors, doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows in the castle walls is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. When Harker realizes this, he goes a bit into a panic and flies about the castle, trying every door, looking out every window, to kind of confirm that indeed he's kind of been sold over, not knowingly, by his partner. There's no way that either of them could know that this was going to be his fate. So Harker writes down in his journal, once he's realized all these things and is starting to put all the details together, he writes, "Of one thing only am I certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and as he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it, he would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself and my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived like a baby by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits, and if the latter be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get through." So this is good. Harker is starting to settle down his mind, and is realizing that he needs to keep his composure, and if he's going to survive this, he is going to need all his wits and wisdom. And that's a good thing. If evil traps you, the worst thing we can do is panic, especially if it's trapped us as an innocent party. And that can be something explored, of course. Is a party ever innocent? Is Harker innocent? There have been plenty of warning signs up to this point, and if perhaps Harker had been better versed in his faith, maybe he would not have embarked on this journey quite like he has, and when he'd been in that village before the Count picks him up, perhaps he would have taken things further. So this is an important cautionary aspect of this story, in that Stoker is already laying the groundwork for a criticism of our modern times. And he said he's giving us a character. He's allowing this character to suffer and go through these rigors for our benefit, so that we can be better prepared ourselves, so that when we face situations of evil, that we go into those situations with wisdom and prayer and having a firm grasp of our surroundings, and even being wise that we don't get into these situations in the first place. So as Harker is kind of mentally taking stock of everything, he notes, "Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should be in a time of loneliness and trouble of help." This is a good thought by Harker. He's maturing spiritually. He's been separated from all of his modernity. He's been, in many senses, reduced to his base spirituality. We don't, of course, wish this on anyone, but sometimes that's the only way God can get through to us, is if he reduces us and humiliates us to a point of um, base belief that we have nothing else to do but to cling to him and to cling to those things that remind us of him, even if we don't know that's what we're doing. This is really heartening. It shows that Harker is starting to come around a bit with his spirituality. He's starting to question the things that his church body, because he's an Anglican, and he's referencing them here. He's been taught to regard crucifixes as idolatrous and with disfavor. So he's being taught now with this very real experience to reconsider his Christianity and this more Orthodox Catholic, small o, small c, Orthodox Catholic faith. He continues concerning the crucifix, is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. This is also very healthy. He's been confronted with this crucifix, which he's been taught is not something Christians are supposed to use, and he's realizing, no, wait, I'm finding comfort in this crucifix. And it isn't the crucifix itself, it is what is depicted on that crucifix. It is the Corpus Christi that is staring at him and longing for him to delve deeper into his faith. God is using this image of himself on the cross to call out to Harker. And Harker has heard that call. This is the work of the Holy Spirit. This is what the Holy Spirit does. This is why images and artwork are so important in the history of the church and in our cultists, because without those images, we could get lost simply in text and words. These images bring Scripture to life in their own way, and they are good and pleasing, so long as we're not worshiping them, of course. But beyond that, they are fine. And it is good that Harker is hoping for the opportunity to ponder what the crucifix means, what it means to have a crucifix, and that he wants to delve into this. This is healthy. And we certainly, as readers, hope he has that opportunity as well. So there's a break in this entry, but it's still the 8th of May. But now the journal entry picks up, and it is midnight. So one could say that this is 8th of May going into the 9th of May. This is an important part of the journal entry as well. I'm probably going to read this because it's not very long, but it's hard to kind of break it up. It's better if we preserve the narrative of it. So he continues, I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvania history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at them all. Of course, the Count, being a vampire, is immortal, so it is likely that he has personally experienced a good number of the centuries of history that he is going to be recounting to Harker. And all told, it could be at least half a millennium worth of history, which is rather remarkable. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar, and a boyar is a Hungarian noble. It's a word that's in the Hungarian culture and is connected to high-born people like nobles, the aristocracy. So again, this he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar, the pride of his house and name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, and their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. So what we can take from this implication is that at some point in the Count's life, and he's going to unpack this a little bit, it's fair to say that the Count was a high-ranking it was high-ranking in the noble class of these people that he's going to reference, and he could have well have been a prince, something of that sort. I wish I could put down all he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke and walked about the room, pulling his great white moustache and grasping anything on which he laid his hands, as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Cizelkis have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches who, expelled from Scythia, had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools, fools, what devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in his veins? So the Cizelkis are a subgroup of Hungarians. I believe they're still around. And in the kingdom of Hungary, you basically had smaller realms within that. And with this, you have the Saxons, you had you had like three groups of Saxons in this region of Hungary, the Wallachian region, and you had the Cizelkis. So basically, three of the Saxon groups were defending different parts of the border of the Wallachian realm, and then the Cizelkis were defending another part. The kingdom of Hungary itself was a rather pluralistic kingdom for its time. It had a bunch of different people groups. Some of them descended from the Huns, others descended from more Slavic peoples, others of the Scandinavian. And then all these are kind of put together into one great big, I don't even know if it's really a melting pot, but you had these different groups around. And so it's kind of hard to tell exactly how far back the Cizelkis go. It's true that when the Count says this whirlpool of European races, that's a good way to put it. You've got just probably easy close to a dozen of these. You have Serbs. Eventually you're going to have Muslims. They're referred to here as the Ottomans, which are essentially a group of Muslims. So that's what we've got here for a background. It's very difficult and complicated history to try to pull it all apart. So he continues, the Count held up his arms. It is a wonder that we were a conquering race, that we were proud, that when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back. Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier, that the Hanfagalis was completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Cizelkis were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkeyland, aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard, for as the Turks say, water sleeps and enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? Talking about the king of Hungary. When was redeemed that great shame of my nation? The shame of Kosovo, when the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent. Okay, so this is kind of our first significant historical kind of location. Now, what he's referring to is the Battle of Kosovo. And in fact, there were two, and it's kind of difficult to know which one he's referring to. The first one happened in towards the end of the 14th century. The Battle of Kosovo, the first one took place on the 15th of June, 1389, and it is part of the Serbian-Ottoman Wars, and it's part of the larger battling of the Ottoman Empire, of the Muslims trying to invade Europe by way of the eastern borders. They tried to do that on the western side through Spain into France, and of course at the famous Battle of Tours, Charles Martel turns them back, and never again do the Muslims invade Europe from the west. So for the rest of history, now that happened in the 8th century. So from now on, this is after the Crusades at this point, or yeah, this is pretty much at the Crusades are done. So the Crusades Europe has lost the Holy Land, and at this point now the Muslims are pushing Europe back, and they will be doing that for a good 200 years. And so this is kind of the beginning of now the Ottoman offensive, of the Muslim offensive into Europe by way of the east. And so in 1389, the Muslims come up against the kingdom of Hungary, specifically the Moravians, the kingdom of Bosnia, the Knights of Spitaler are present. This is a ringing victory for the Muslims. However, it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory, which may be why in Serbian culture this particular battle is very highly thought of. It's a major part of their calendar. I'm trying to figure out what they call it. Okay, the day of the battle is known in Serbian as Vidovdan, which is Saint Vitus's Day. And interestingly enough, and I'm reading this off of Wikipedia, interestingly enough, there have been a number of significant serendipitous even events that have occurred in the history of the country on this day of Serbia. And one of them is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, which of course begins World War I, or at least begins the hostilities that will lead to World War I. So there's a number of events that are listed here, and it's interesting how this date seems to continue to play a role in Serbian history. Sometimes it's planned, other times it seems to be rather coincidental. So, but I guess the point is, it would seem a bit odd that the count would refer to this battle, this first battle in the 14th century, as a great shame. So perhaps he is referring to the second battle of Kosovo, which occurred in 1448. At this point, this is, again, this is still part of the Muslim incursions into Eastern Europe. And now this is the Muslims versus the Kingdom of Hungary. And this is also is a Muslim victory, but it is much more decisive. it seems to me to fit quite well this great shame. Um, Overall, the Muslim force led by Murad II, who would be a pain in the side of um, the Kingdom of Hungary for a number of years. Um, Only 4,000 are killed on the Muslim side, whereas the Europeans lose 4 times that many. They are quite literally obliterated. And this battle, and even some of the politics that precede it, certainly set up this notion of a great shame. Um, and we'll get into that a little bit in a moment. But before this battle, there is a king known as Vlad II. He is the father of Vlad the Impaler, and he does quite a bit of compromising and capitulation to the Muslims, which angers a good number of the leaders of the Kingdom of Hungary. So you've got the Kingdom of Hungary, but then you've got the this province of Wallach, and Vlad is the king of, well, he's not really the king. He's they have a name for it, a voivode, which is kind of, it's essentially, it's an elected, it's kind of like our president or a governor. It's probably more like a governor, but he's elected, so he's royalty. But the way their government works is that they're actually electing royalty to be the leader, and it is possible for a leader to be elected and unelected and then re-elected. So it's an area which has gone through quite a bit of turmoil. At one point, over a period of about, oh gosh, maybe 50 years, I'm guessing. I'm ballparking it. But over about like 50 years, they have like 18 different leadership changes among like 4 different people. So it's a very volatile political atmosphere. And Vlad II does quite a bit of diplomacy with the Muslims, which angers the rest of the kingdom. So, and in fact, it ends up leading to his death, and the death of his oldest son, who followed in his father's footsteps, didn't agree with what his father was doing, but ultimately the boyars capture and kill both the father and the son because they've just done way too much compromising with the Muslims. And this is a problem. So that is about 4 years before this battle. And Vlad more or less sits it out. I believe he commits some forces to it, but he doesn't actually take part in the battle himself. And so one would think that this would be much more fitting to what the Count is referring to when he says a great shame, because not only is there the shame of the king of Wallachia compromising with the invader and not willing to defend the borders, as the Cizelkis have been defending the borders now for generations. But now they go into battle and the Muslims completely rout them. So continuing, who was it but one of my own race who as voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Here we can only speculate, but we're assuming that Dracula is referring to Vlad III, also known as the Impaler, who, according to tradition, is the primary historical figure that Stoker bases his Dracula character on. I'm not really sure why he would have done that, because there was nothing really about Vlad that I'm aware of in the historical record that Vlad was dealing with the occult or actually drinking blood. What we do know is that he, like his father, are part of an order. The name Dracula was the patronym of the descendants of Vlad II of Wallachia, who took the name Dracula after being invested in the Order of the Dragon in 1431. In the old Romanian language, the word Dracul meant the dragon, and Dracula meant son of the dragon. So you have Vlad II Dracul, and then Vlad the Impaler would have been Dracula. So we have Dracul, the dragon, Dracula, son of the dragon. We have something very similar in Arthurian literature, with Arthur being known as Arthur Pendragon, and he was named that after his father as well, who was known as a Pendragon, and that basically translates, I believe, to a kingly dragon, the penultimate dragon. So here in this story, the word, being called Dracula, the son of the dragon, has a couple of layers of meaning. It has the historical layer, being part of this order that Vlad II and his son was a part of. But of course, it also has a spiritual connotation. In Scripture, Satan is known as, or usually is depicted as, the dragon. So in apocalyptic lore, when Michael goes to war against the dragon, this is kind of a the name's escaping me at the moment. A topology of Jesus versus Satan. Not that there wasn't an actual battle between Michael and Satan, but Satan is often referred to or is depicted as a dragon, especially if you look at the book of Revelation. So here, to Christians paying attention, we have Dracula praising somebody in his lineage. We don't know. It's not really clear, by the way, if Dracula is wanting the reader to think that either he is this Vlad who keeps being reincarnated as different people in history, like Zorro might be, or if the Count is connected as a prince to this house in some manner. It's not really clear, but Stoker has already said that according to Dracula, that whenever he speaks of his house, he speaks of his house with that royal we. So he pretty much looks at himself as being the physical manifestation of the house of Dracula. So however that's intended to play out, we don't really know. But the point is, son of the dragon, Dracula, Count Dracula, is the son of the devil. And he's going to be certainly acting in this way. The Count continues, "Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them." So again, we're going to pause here real quick and take a look at this note, if it lets me. It's not letting me. Okay, so this may be a conflation when he's talking about his own unworthy brother. Because again, this is fiction, so Stoker's kind of playing a little bit with history. We don't know how much of this history was actually known to Stoker, how much research he did. But, he is telling a story, so, he's going to take the historical record and he's going to play around with it a little bit, and that's fine. As an author, you can do that. And because you need to tell a story, and you can't always be tied up in all the nuances of history. I'm not saying that when you write historical fiction that it's okay to just revise history. That you can't do that. But if you're trying to tell a certain kind of story, and if you're dealing with very complicated history like Eastern European history tends to be, I think it's okay to kind of allow for certain figures to represent more complex family structures or relationships or events. So I think here Dracula is conflating these things, and referring to those Wallachian rulers who compromised and accepted the suzerainty of the Muslim Ottomans out of convenience and survival, such as Vlad II, as we already spoke of. Also Radu the Fair, which would be Vlad III's younger brother, who appears, according to history, to have converted to Islam during the brother's captivity. So basically what happened is Vlad the Impaler, when they were boys, Vlad the Impaler and his younger brother were both captured by the Ottoman Muslims and held for ransom, basically. And I believe that Vlad II was captured as well. And eventually he was released. But his sons were not. And it was pretty much intended to be insurance to make sure that Vlad II would keep his promise to not oppose the Muslims as they continued to battle against the Kingdom of Hungary, as they continued to battle against the Europeans. Vlad II has agreed to sit it out, which may be a testament to the power he wielded, to how big the Wallachian kingdom may have been. It could have been that part of the Kingdom of Hungary may have been a very strategic part of the kingdom, and it was easier to attack by that route, and so the Muslims needed Vlad II as ruler of the Wallachian province to sit things out, so they would have an easy avenue towards getting deeper into the Kingdom of Hungary. And there's a reason, by the way, why the Kingdom of Hungary is being attacked incessantly. So anyway, you've got these two brothers, and according to the historical record, it would seem, it's kind of sketchy, but it seems to imply that the younger brother becomes good friends with one of the sons of the court of the same age, and kind of like Ben-Hur and Masala, if you want, as Ben-Hur and Masala grow up in the Roman Empire, Ben-Hur and Masala become really good friends. Of course, Ben-Hur doesn't give up his Judaism, but we have that kind of a scenario. And for whatever reason, the younger brother, it appears, gave up his Christian faith and really became a Muslim, perhaps in secret, and therefore allowed the Muslims to do what they wanted when he was the ruler. And I don't think he was the ruler for very long. I did look at it, but I don't remember exactly. And so the shame of slavery is essentially, for a time, in the 15th century, the Kingdom of Hungary, or at least provinces in the Kingdom of Hungary, paid tribute to the Muslim overlords in order for protection. So, continuing on here. Was it not this Dracula indeed who inspired that other of his race, who in a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkeyland, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph? This is where we think that Dracula is definitely speaking of himself. It is possible that these constant betrayals by the house of Dracula, the house of Vlad, finally inspires Count Dracula, whoever he may be. It may not even be probably is not even his real name. We don't know his name. But he kind of picks up the mantle from these other family members, and now he's had enough. He's had enough of the slavery, and now he's going to lead his people, this people group in Wallachia, and he's going to oppose the Muslim. And so now he's going to take this notion, you're going to start to see this pride come out as an entitled warrior king, warrior prince who has lived for centuries. He and has spilled much blood himself, has seen much blood of his own people be spilled. Now, if you talk to anyone who's been to war, it's a bit of a maddening experience. You lose a piece of yourself when you go to battle. Now imagine doing that for centuries and centuries. You've been fighting for so long, and there's been so much blood spilled, your own, that of your kinsfolk. You probably start to go mad a little bit. Now, I haven't seen Dracula Untold. I still want to see that movie, even though I know it's been kind of panned. But there's an element to that particular story, as I recall from the trailers, where you have Luke Evans' Dracula, who is constantly fighting against the Muslims. And there seems to be this implication that he's had enough and he's at his wit's end, and he makes a pact with the devil, I would imagine, or a representative of the devil. And in exchange for great power, gives his soul over, and then now he receives a great amount of power in order to oppose this Muslim incursion. There is another battle also that we want to quickly refer to, which the count is going to be coming up to, so I just want to get it ready. Although I haven't seen it. Did I skip over it? And that is the Battle of Mohawks. Though I haven't seen it here. Oh, okay, it's coming up. Okay, so they said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? So you can start to see this arrogance starting to come out, and this is why we're pretty sure that this is Dracula referring to his own place in history, in his people's fight against the Muslims. Where ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when after the Battle of Mohawks we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders, for our spirit would not brook that we were not free. So the Battle of Mohawks is another pinnacle point in Hungarian history. It essentially sees the end of the Kingdom of Hungary. And it's another battle that sees a decisive Ottoman victory. And because of this battle, the Hungarians cease to be an opposing force against the Muslims. And after this Battle of Mohawks, which is it's a pivotal, epochal battle in European history, the Muslims are now able to turn their attention to Constantinople. And so the Battle of Mohawks occurs in 1526. Just want to make sure I have this right. It is possible, actually. Let me just look real quick. Okay, so I had this a little bit wrong. So it's actually the second battle of Kosovo. The second battle of Kosovo that we talked about, where the Muslims defeat the Hungarian realm, and it ceases to be a problem for them, and now they're able to turn their attention to Constantinople. And then eventually the siege of Constantinople, which occurs in 1456, I believe, and and that is, at that point, the Muslims take over Constantinople, and to this day is ruled by the Muslim world, if you will. So the Battle of Mohawks is another important battle, and essentially with this battle, this battle takes place about 100 years after the Battle of Kosovo, and with this battle and with the Muslim victory over the Kingdom of Hungary, I believe this sees the end of the Kingdom of Hungary. So now, Battle of Kosovo is the end of the Kingdom of Hungary being a threat to the Muslims, whereas now the Battle of Mohacs, about 100 years later, is the end of this kingdom existing in the state that we know it, and it's probably going to get broken up, as usually happens to that part of Eastern Europe. And the aftermath, it's so you have the collapse and partition of medieval Hungary, and that's where we have now a whole bunch of different countries and we have Hungary, but now we have a whole bunch of different countries that came out of that. And now the Ottomans, now the Muslims can turn their attention to the Habsburgs. And we're soon going to have the Great Siege of Vienna, which is actually occurring during the Reformation. So this is what Dracula is referring to, and what he seems to be implying here as he's telling this story is, after the Battle of Mohacs, his people, the Szegényes, he seems to be implying. Now, I didn't look up this history, and I probably should have, because it's interesting, but it seems to me like now they are throwing off Hungary as being their rulers, and they're kind of going to go about it on their own as their own people. This is an interesting statement that Dracula says, "Our spirit would not brook that we were not free." This is something that is, in a sense, satanic, in the sense that there is this sense of freedom that Satan wants. He's rebelling against heaven because, well, gee, if I can't rule heaven as the Son of God is ruling heaven, because as I think we said in a previous video, Satan thinks that the throne of God, that the throne intended for the Son of God, should be his. If we kind of look at it that way, Scripture doesn't tell us that. This is speculation. But if we look at it that way, as one of the reasons why Satan rebels, there's this sense of, well, if I can't rule, then I want to be free. But it's a freedom that's separated completely. A freedom where there is no authority. So it's kind of an anarchical freedom, which is not really freedom. So Dracula continues, "Ah, young sir, the Szekényes and the Dracula as their heart's blood. Their brains and their swords can boast a record that mushroom growths like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are as a tale that is told." So he's kind of lamenting now that all this stuff has passed into legend. The modern world works very differently than it used to. He's now, in a very strange way, very sensitive to the loss of any more blood of his people. He thinks his people have spilled enough blood. And now, as Dracula, though, he still he has a bloodlust, and I think in a sense, vengeance. You know, he believes that all this blood that has been spilled, his people have a right to rule, and his people live in him, and he has this kind of idea to rule Europe. And to finally give what his people are owed. He believes that his people have spilled so much blood, they are owed to rule and to be obeyed. And so I think this is one of the significant driving forces of what Dracula is going for when he's deciding to go to England. Because, of course, England is a great symbol of Western Europe. And to defeat England would certainly, especially during the 19th century, during what is often termed Pax Britannica, England is kind of the center of the world right now. And so to defeat England, it would be a masterstroke, and it would finally justify and legitimize Dracula and his people. So I think this is a major thing that is driving Dracula to do what he's doing is that there's massive pride, massive arrogance. This is beyond patriotism. This is a sense of nationalism. This is nationalism on a religious level. Literally, Dracula is worshiping the ancestors, the blood of his ancestors. He feels he's spilled so much of their blood, and their blood is on him, that he now is going to go off into Europe and conquer and finally give his people their due. So at this point, the journal entry is done and it's over, and it'll pick up again about 3 days later. So we will recommence with the video series, beginning with the next journal entry. So hopefully you've enjoyed this kind of walk down history, and by all means ask questions if there's more of the history that you'd like to get into or find out about. By all means ask questions wherever you see this video posted, and I'd be happy to delve into that, because this history, when you get wrapped up in history like this, and you are literally becoming one with an epoch, with a people, you're literally the physical embodiment of the people. By the way, this is an interesting thought too. The devil is an antichrist. Okay, so Christ, if you read scripture, is the physical embodiment of his people, his nation of Israel. And also, spiritually speaking, Christ is the physical embodiment of the church. So God's people, the church, Christendom. So Dracula too is the physical manifestation of his people. So and just as Christ shed his blood for the salvation of his people, Dracula is going to has shed the blood of his people. Now it's interesting. I don't know if Dracula has really shed blood, but he certainly has given his people over it through warfare. He's sacrificed so many of his own kinsfolk over these centuries, that now he wants that to mean something. So he like Christ, but an antichrist, because whereas Christ sheds his blood to redeem his people and give them life, Dracula has shed the blood of his people and given them death. And now, as a physical manifestation of death, he's going to shed the blood of other people. He's literally going to drink their blood and bring upon them a different kind of horrific, cursed death. It will not be a real death. And so you can kind of see how these two figures, that this antichrist type is pitted against the figure of Jesus, the historical figure of Jesus, who is also the physical manifestation of his people. So that's a kind of a cool aspect of this story. I'm not sure Stoker was going for that, but as a theologian and a pastor in training, in formation, that's certainly something that a Christian can pick up on, who is well versed in the scriptures, and can certainly see that Stoker's laying the groundwork to set up Dracula as this antichrist. And of course, as this story continues, this is going to become more and more obvious in the things that Dracula says and does. So hopefully that'll give you something more to kind of look for as we get into this story. Okay. Thank you.